It does seem, Andra, welcome back to the show, that Georgia could be at the very center of the claims the president's getting ready to make tonight, both in terms of, say, what happened in Fulton County, and also even, it's been reported, could look into the results that elected Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in the first place. Will voters in Georgia or anywhere else believe that?
I think it really comes down to the quality of the evidence that's presented. So if President Trump wants to make this case and he says that this, election security commission that he's put together has findings, people are going to have to interrogate those. They're going to have to interrogate the quality of the source, whether or not it is objective, whether or not the analysis is systematic or not. But suffice to say, he has an uphill climb. If we look nationally at what people think about the results of the 2020 election, the Economist and YouGov did a survey that came out about a month ago. Only 28% of Americans believe that Donald Trump really won the 2020 election. If we break that down by party, it's about half of Republicans. So there are a lot of people who will need convincing, and there are a lot of people who will also want to ask whether or not this line of inquiry is even valid or prudent at this time, given all the challenges that our nation is facing right now.
Well, let's catalog some of them. The president, professor, says, or at least his subordinates say, he could talk about a range of issues. This is the narrative we've been hearing throughout the week, knowing that he wants to have a higher cadence of these primetime addresses that he has typically not embraced. If he does, in fact, get to the economy this evening, gets to Iran, what's the impact for voters here who are trying to balance their own lives here and follow the ball at the White House?
Well, this primetime address format is actually an interesting format. Political scientist Samuel Cornell kind of developed this idea called going public more than 40 years ago, and he was using the Reagan administration's use of these primetime addresses as an example here. And so what President Reagan did and what President Trump could be doing tonight is using primetime addresses to circumvent Congress, to try to persuade individual voters, to put pressure on their Congress members, on their senators to vote for legislation. So if this is about voting, then I think the big question is, does President Trump use this to try to boost his SAVE Act, which is stalled? Or is he going to try to announce some type of unilateral action that could immediately be put into court because of questions about whether or not the executive branch has power over elections, or whether or not it looks like he's trying to suspend elections? So we have to wait to see exactly where this is going. If he's going to make these addresses, I think it becomes a question of whether or not he uses it as persuasion to try to influence the legislative branch to align with his agenda, or whether or not he's using it to justify some type of unilateral action, and whether or not that unilateral action would actually be deemed constitutional, even within the context of expansive presidential power.
Well, and on the persuasion idea, Andra, it's one thing to persuade elected officials to try to do things. It's another to persuade voters to show out and to vote your way. If this is primarily going to be about 2020 and election integrity, does that not play to the president's base? Is that not motivating for them?
So it might be motivating to the base, where you could look at half of them believing that, that President Trump didn't win the 2020 election as an evidence of slippage in some way, shape, or form. But I think the important thing to kind of keep in mind is that when we're talking about congressional elections in this cycle, given party polarization, most seats are safe. We're talking about a handful, a few dozen districts that could be swinging. This is not helpful for them. This is also not necessarily going to be helpful and most salient even for base voters who might have concerns about other issues like the state of the economy, like our continued involvement in the war in Iran and other types of issues. And so I think the question that we may be thinking about tomorrow, once we've heard the speech and once we know what action he's proposing or what his big announcement is whether or not this was actually a good use of time.
Democratic Congressman Jim Himes with an op-ed in the New York Times talking about this very issue, Professor. The headline on the guest essay, Trump's election denial has never been more dangerous. And he floats the prospect, knowing that, as Kayleigh mentioned, FBI Director Kash Patel may be part of this, along with others, including Bill Pulte. His concern that Bill Pulte or others could declassify certain documents that are not, in fact, credible, anecdotal evidence, things that have not been confirmed by our intelligence agencies, could really change some Americans' view of the electoral system and the security around elections, which begs the question, is this about 2020 or is this about 2026?
I think it's about both. President Trump certainly has an incentive for his legacy to try to relitigate 2020 because I think he wants to, at the end, feel vindicated. And this is the way that he has decided that he will feel vindicated. It's not enough to have come back and won election again in 2024 for him. He has to prove that everything was wrong about 2020 and perhaps get a pound of flesh from people who were involved in that. I think the danger with this classified information being declassified selectively is whether or not people are discerning of the source of the information and the quality and the systematic analysis of that information. And so it could reinforce ideas amongst people who have been misinformed that their thoughts and that their sort of instincts about the 2020 election were real. There are also people who would be inured to that, sometimes for superficial reasons, like it's coming from the wrong party, but also because there are other people who might be better equipped to be able to discern misinformation and then to be able to kind of dispel that from their thought process.